I'd like to introduce you to today's keynote speaker, Harel Gadot from Medix Ventures. He's going to be talking to you about surgical robotics and the democratization of access. And his presentation will be followed by a very nice panel of experts in the surgical robotics space. So without further ado, if you'd please help me welcome Harel.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody here. And Laurie, thank you for inviting me. It's been about 2 years since I've been here in person, so it's good to be out of the office and meet people in person. My name is Harel Gadot. I am the founder of Medix Ventures Group, which is a management and investment company in the healthcare space, but mostly we're focusing on surgical robotics. And that's what I would like to discuss with you, followed by smarter people than myself joining me on a panel. So what is a robot? I'm going to wake all of you up. Here's a question. Is this a robot? How many of you think this is a robot? Why not? Isn't Intuitive Surgical a $120 billion company was based on the fact to help physicians do things just easier? Isn't a snowblower makes our life easier? So can we argue this is a robot? How about Google? How many of you think that Google is a robot? Which one? Is the software, the search engine, is a robot? Or is it the hardware robot? Interesting, isn't it? How about the airplanes? Show of hands, how many of you, before COVID, during COVID, got on an airplane, got into your seat, and said, holy shnikes, a robot is flying me? None of you. The fact is that 95% of the flight is done by a robot. And still, we get in an airplane, day in and day out, we get up 30,000 feet, and we have zero problem letting a robot fly us. Why is that? Yet, I still see patients saying, I want Dr. So-and-so to do the procedure, I don't want a robot. Why is that? So what is a robot? So let's talk about what makes a machine a robot. And many times when you talk about what makes it a robot, it has to do with the control or the operation mode of it. And that's in the industry, everybody's talking the same language, so I probably don't educate you in anything new, right? So in the past, it was passive. What does it mean, passive? Intuitive Surgical. Why is it passive? If you have a bad surgeon, the robot will not make you a better surgeon, period. It will only mimic what you're doing. That's passive. And still, it's a $120 billion company, so they're great, don't get me wrong. As we move into the present, we see companies like Mazor Robotics. You see companies like Meko, that they're starting to integrate some additional features other than what they called in the past, and forgive me for the language, it's called master-slave. They're not. They're actually integrating some imaging, they're integrating some smart data, sometimes they're even integrating some tools to help with the procedure. But as we look forward, how many of you heard about artificial intelligence, deep learning? And why is it for? It is to get us to the final or the holy grail of autonomous. So let me answer the first question everybody's asking me. So are you here to preach that we're going to replace the physicians? No. We're not going to replace the pilots, and we're not going to replace the physicians. We are here to enhance their capabilities the same way that we did in aviation 20 years ago. So what makes a machine a robot? In the past, it was passive. Here's an example of a passive machine or robot. Think about it. That's the capital equipment. You can punch each other. You know, punch buggy? Those of you who know the game? I don't know if you can smile or smiling or not because of the mask. I'll assume you are. And you had assisted tools. A map was an assisted tool. Again, if you look into what robotics were, and we'll talk a second if it's really robotics, that's the way it was. You look into a scan or anything else that happened before, and then you plan your surgery as you go through the way. Now, how many of you use maps today? My father-in-law. That's a different story. Well, I can give you a speech about just him for half an hour, but that's a different story. But if we take this example of the automobile industry, then we talk about the semi-active. And all of your cars today, I assume, now have some software in it, right? The backup camera, the front camera. We also have big data. Think about it. Waze and Mobileye are learning machines. They're learning your path, they're learning what your fellows are doing, and they're giving you a better way to advance forward. And it's happening today in the automobile industry. And we talk about the future of autonomous, and how many of you believe that we're going to have autonomous cars in the next 10 to 15 years? I do. All of you do, or most of you. And it's real, companies are working on it. But it's not really a car, it's a driving ecosystem. We are going to move from a car to a complete ecosystem that allows you to get from point A to point B. And I gotta tell you, there are some days that I wish I had it today. I'm tired, I wanna get another glass of wine, and I can't. This will solve that. And why are we doing all of this? For one reason only, to democratize driving. The industry recognized there's too many accidents for one reason only, the drivers. So we're trying to democratize driving. And this is happening. All of you raised your hand when I said, you believe this is real? Yes. How many of you believe that in 15 years we'll see surgeries done just by robots? Why not? 20 years ago, if I ask you, do you believe you can get on an airplane and 95% of the flight will be done by a robot? You will not raise your hand, and it's real. It's happening right now. So if the future is autonomous, let's talk about what's happening in the surgical robotics today. Because it seems like we're all aligned on other industries and what is a machine, what is a robot. How many of you are familiar with robotic surgery today? Raise your hand. Sorry, you're all wrong. Because what's the common denominator in these companies? I'm sure all of you know Mazor, Intuitive, Meko, and we can keep going. What's the common denominator that you see over there? Here it is. You see the hand of the physician doing the surgery. So you actually, all of you are wrong. None of you know surgical robotics. What you do know is robotic-assisted surgery. I did not ask you about robotic-assisted surgery. That's the past, guys. Maybe present. I asked you about robotic surgery. So all agree with me that you're wrong? Well, at least I will agree with myself. What's the Holy Grail? Why are we doing robotic surgery is to democratize surgery. And as long as we're going to keep the technical skills of the physician in the decision-making of the procedure, we will never, ever democratize surgery. Because you will always find somebody who was born with better skills. You will always find a 50-year-old physician who has 30 years of experience, who has a way better experience and hands than the 20-year-old. So can we really democratize surgery, which is the holy grail of surgery, through robotic-assisted surgery? And the answer is absolutely not. And here's the proof. I always tell people, I can give you a speech, but I can prove it to you. And here's the proof. There is zero adoption of robotic surgery. That's, to me, it's nothing. The potential compared to where we are today, it's nothing. And the main reason is, it's because we're not there. So how can we get there? So let me introduce you to something a little bit different. I called it about 3 years ago, the AAA of robotics. So let's change what is a robot, and instead of saying passive, let's talk about that in the past, it was assisted. That's what we have today. It's assisted. We're still relying on the technical skills of the physicians. And what that means? It means that it's mostly hardware. It's mostly the capital equipment, the $1 million, $2 million equipment. As we move into the present, we're moving into advised. So we have software, we have imaging modalities, and as we move into the future, We're going to have artificial intelligence, deep learning, because think about it. When a physician is doing a surgery today, what the patient is getting is the experience of that physician alone, right? It's how many procedures he has done to date, which conferences he or she went to. But what about if a physician can do a procedure, and during the procedure, they can get thousands of clinical decision points that will help them make a better decision and customize the procedure. Today, we're not customizing procedures. Today, every person get the same appendectomy, period. Regardless of a BMI, regardless of height, female, male. Why? Could it be a different? Could be. Do we know that? We don't. But we will. And I'll show you some examples as we move forward. So as we looked into the driving world or the automobile world, we need to look the same way into healthcare and surgery. We need to stop talking about surgical robotics and start talking about robotic ecosystem. And if you talk about today, people say capital equipment, service. But what about the instruments, for example? Most companies, what they do, to give you the example of Mazor got so big because they used the implants of Medtronic. And Medtronic was smart enough to recognize that and say, why don't we bundle them together, so-called, and make an ecosystem that I have my implants that can be fit directly to the robot. So as we look into the future puzzle, it's not just the capital equipment, it's how do we develop instruments that are dedicated for the robotic surgery. Nobody's doing it today. Well, some companies talking about it. I can mention some of them. I actually came from one of them in the past. But nobody's actually doing it. So as we develop a robot, we are still relying on off-the-shelf instruments. Still, we're missing the fact of customization of this procedure for a patient. Imaging. You're going to hear from Philips here. I'm glad that Alex is here today. Same thing today. Companies need to make sure that they will work with Siemens and Canon and Philips, and it's the CT or the MRI or the fluoro, but it's not integrated. It's everyone working alone. And then not last, the capital equipment, of course, we'll talk about it as well, and the big data. Where do we collect the big data? If Microbot Medical or Exact Robotics or any of my robotic companies develop the robot and Philips getting the images, how do we ensure that we work together? That we get the images and analyze them in a way that they benefit, we benefit, and the only person that will benefit will be the patient. That's not the way it works today, and that's where we're missing big time. And why do we need to understand this ecosystem? It's very simple, because we need to understand the role of a physician or a surgeon. And the role of the physician, and I'm not discounting their skills. My mom, I have a Jewish mom, she wished I was a doctor. So I'm the biggest disappointment for my mom, or a lawyer, and I'm neither. But I'm not discounting their skills. But that's what they do. They see, they do, and they know what they did, and it's a circle that keeps going. And in order for us to fit into that circle, we can't just have capital equipment, because the capital equipment does only one thing, the doing. But if we start looking into this and we start filling the gaps, seeing is the imaging, doing is the capital equipment and the instruments, and knowing is the big data, guess what we did? We just built the entire ecosystem that it's working today. It's working today for the physician in their own hands. And we have to take away this thing that I hear all the time, in my hands. Do you know how many times I heard, in my hands I get the best results? But not everybody get the same results. There's physicians in New York City that do procedures day in and day out that somebody in Iowa, or let alone China or somewhere else in the world, don't do. So in their hands, the patient won't get the same outcome. Why? Why do we benefit patients that live in New York City or in Chicago or here in Boston over other patients? Why can't we just democratize everything? So if we really understand the surgeon's role, then what we need to do is very simple. We need to ensure that we let them, just like the pilot, focus on their intellect skills. what they know, what they learn, and enhance their capabilities and get rid of their technical skills. It's crazy. Just think about the drivers. That's exactly what we're doing. We're getting rid of their technical skills and we're focusing on their intellect skills, that even the pilots, that if needed to, they can come in, they can do some stuff, but that's where we need to be. Is it working? Yes. And I'll show you some examples. So I want to show you, how many of you heard of Exact Robotics? Good. So welcome to the world of where ecosystem should be. It's the first hands-free robotic system in the world, but before we even talk about the benefit of hands-free robotics, this is the world before Exact. You see the physicians, you see $1, $2 million capital equipment. Welcome to Exact. A robot the size of an iPad that can be a platform, that it is a platform, not can be, it's a platform to do anything and everything in interventional procedure. So the way I look at it, you have the laparoscopic robotics, intuitive surgical, CMR, you have the endovascular procedures, which are companies like Corindus, Microbot Medical, and then you have the interventional procedures, which are Exact Robotics, the only company in the world. But how great it is that you can take one robot the size of an iPad and you can move it between rooms in a hospital. You can actually move it outside the hospital. You can do it in an office setting and have one robot to all the procedures. But look how beautiful an ecosystem works together. You have a small robot, that's the part of the capital equipment, that it's being attached to the patient. So you don't need to have a big capital equipment putting it. And then you get the second part of the ecosystem, which is the imaging. And the imaging now talks to the robot. And in between them, there's one thing, which is the physician that can see it's in the room, outside the room, in Kathmandu as far as he's concerned. And then he got the images, and then he's doing one more thing. He's choosing the tools, you can see it, but if you look at the upper left side next to the Exact logo, he's choosing the tool that he would like to use in the procedure. Here are the instruments. And then the physician, using big data analysis to start planning the procedure. And he's telling the robot, here's the target, and the robot tells him back, here's the trajectory. And the physician is telling the robot, hold up, I see a vertebra, avoid it. And the robot tells back to the physician, based on the instrument you told me you want to use, based on the imaging I acquired, based on where the target is that you told me, doctor, I'm going to give you a different trajectory. I'm going to give you a nonlinear trajectory. Nobody in the world, no human can do a nonlinear trajectory, period. It's not even a discussion. So anybody want to argue with me, you already lost. And then the physician tells the robot, let me use my clinicals, my intellect skills. I'm comfortable with this. And he press a button, and look what happened. The robot takes the tool right to the target. You know who benefits from that? The patient. So let me tell you why. Less radiation. Why less radiation? Because what they do today, they insert a tool and they take it out. And they put it in and they take it out. Because it's a soft tissue and it's a flexible needle. Regardless if it's ablation or a biopsy or drug delivery. And every time they put it in and take it out, they need to do another scan for the patient. So reduce radiation for the patient, for the physician. You can do it remotely. Reduce radiation for the physician. Reduce physical strain for the physician. Accuracy. The accuracy of this technology is about 1 millimeter. What does it mean, 1 millimeter? So let me tell you stories. This is mostly about cancer treatments, or a lot of cancer treatments. Most physicians, when they see a target less than 1 centimeter, do you know what they tell their patient? Go home, wait until it grows. Really? I have 1 centimeter lesion in my lung, the deadliest cancer, and you want me to go home and wait until it's going to grow? With 1 millimeter, you can treat patient earlier. Patients benefit from that. There's about 10 to 30% of the patients who are getting, for example, biopsies, who go home just to get a phone call saying, Sorry, we missed the target, come back. It's great, isn't it? How about the patient who don't get that phone call? You're going to eliminate this with these technologies. This is how we put the ecosystem to work in order to benefit one person only, which is the patient. I was wrong. I said one person. But you know who else is going to benefit greatly from it? It's the healthcare system. We treat patients earlier. We can cure them earlier. We don't send them home and bring them back. They won't take the place of another patient that may need to get treated. This is why Exact is very unique, not only because it's the first hands-free robot in the world, it's the only one. Not only because it's the only autonomous robot in the world, but because it really puts together all the four parts of the ecosystem that most of the companies, from J&J, Medtronic, Intuitive Surgical, to small startups, are trying to do. So what's next? In my humble opinion, the future is here. So when I ask you if you're going to see 10 to 15 years from now at the beginning, you know what, I'll try something I've never done before. When I started, I asked you, you believe that there's going to be a self-driving autonomous car in the next 10 years. All of you raised your hand. I asked you the same thing about surgical robotics. None of you raised your hand. I just showed you Exact. Let me ask you again. How many of you believe that in 10 years we're going to have a surgical robot doing an autonomous procedure? Okay, 50%. If you give me 10 more minutes, I may convince the other 50%. So the future is here. By the way, Exact is commercialized. For those of you who think this is under development. So let me ask again. Exact has FDA clearance. If that Exact already has a few customers here in the US, big accounts. So how many of you believe that autonomous robot will be here in the market in the next 10 years? Okay, 75%. I'm getting there. You know, maybe another 5 minutes. Think about it, right? I think we all agree that there's a current shift into autonomous. I will strongly argue that the enabling technologies, imaging, instruments, even AI and deep learning is still underutilized. I don't think we know how to leverage their capabilities to the best. Cross industries, holistic collaboration is required. Exact Robotics will never have and will never have the knowledge that Philips has in imaging, that Medtronic has in instruments. Will never. Doesn't mean we cannot buy them one day, right? But we will never have it until we're gonna get big enough. Multiple stakeholders, that's another challenge. Why are we getting on an airplane and we feel extremely comfortable flying out there for 30,000 feet? It's because the pilot accepted it, the flight attendant, the FAA. Is it the same thing in the surgical robotics? Not yet. Because we still hear the physician saying, in my hands. We still hear the FDA saying, ooh, hold up, autonomous robot? Okay, call 911. So we're not there yet, but are we on the path? Absolutely. I can tell you that I have a lot of respect to the FDA. I remember the first meeting we had with them with Exact, and a year later when we had the second meeting, they took the time, they educated themselves and us, and we worked together to get the approval to benefit patients. So we were getting there. And I really believe that once we reach a complete ecosystem to work together, we will change the much needed healthcare system in the US and worldwide. So I told you my view. I'm one person. I come from a small company. Now, I came from Johnson & Johnson 10 years ago. But what I would like to do now, I would like to add much smarter people than me to the stage and have a discussion about how we get to this. Because when I'm walking around here and I see all the capital equipments, you know, AI, all the things, it's exciting because we just need to find a way to bring them together.